Hi again, this is the third session on morphology. Today's session is going to be very short because it's relatively dense and you may want to watch the video twice. So let's get to it. Right, so today's lecture is about syntagmatic and paradigmatic relations in morphology, and we'll look mostly at paradigmatic relations. If you haven't heard these concepts before, a syntagmatic relation is a relation between units that follow each other in speech, and a paradigmatic relation is a relation between units that can occur in the same slot in speech. So here's an example of a template of possible sentences. So something like, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And there are several points to make here. So the relation between the first two words, the syntactic one, I'll talk about syntactic relations next week. But the point here is that relation between in and the and beginning and in, so the structure here is syntagmatic. Because they cannot co-occur in the same position, they have to follow each other, and they are related by rules constraining what can come before what. However, if we look at this slot here, you see that there are several alternatives which we could have used in the sentence. You could have used God, you could have used Allah, you could have used he. So in the beginning, Allah created the heavens and the earth. And instead of created, you could have used made. So relations between words that can occur in the same position but are mutually exclusive are called to be paradigmatic. And they are mutually exclusive because you cannot use them both at the same time. So you cannot say, in the beginning God made the heavens and the earth. So that's what we are talking about when we say there are paradigmatic relations. Now, in morphology, we can think about inflection both in terms of paradigmatic and syntagmatic relations. So, if you look at the first example that has the number 8.2, in case you're wondering, all these examples in morphology have these numbers because I'm taking them from a book. I think I haven't linked to it yet. Let's do that right now because it's important, I guess. So this is the book that I am using for most of these materials. It's called Understanding Morphology. It's by Martin Hasselmatt and Andreas Sins. And if you're interested, I can send it to you. Okay, in any case, back to the presentation. So here you have a base or a stem, which is back, and you have a selection of possible suffixes for building plurals. And the relation between the possible suffixes for building plurals, which is a null suffix, an s and an n, like in children, is paradigmatic. They are mutually exclusive. You cannot use two of them at the same time, and they don't follow each other, and they occur in the same position. The syntagmatic relation is the relation between the base and the suffix itself. So if you wanted to write this as a sort of morpheme-based relation, you could do something like this. I haven't introduced this formalism, but it's quite straightforward. You have a feature set. The first feature is phonology. The second feature is a part of speech. And the third feature is the meaning. Here the meaning is represented with words. And you see the phonology of the stem, which is beg, and the phonology of the suffix, which is z. And here it basically says that the suffix must attach to a noun and then the plural meaning. And the relationship between these two morphemes is that they must follow each other and they produce the word bags. So as you can see, we can understand relations in morphology both from a syntagmatic and a paradigmatic perspective. However, you can also express relations purely on a paradigmatic dimension. So if you have something like this, then you're saying that there's some phonology here which is expressed by a variable x in this case, and it has the semantics of being singular and it has some meaning. It's making a relation that it has the meaning of x, and you can set it up in a paradigmatic relation with a corresponding form which is the same as the phonology here on the top, plus a z at the end. It's still a noun, it has the same lexical semantics, but now the number is plural. And this is a paradigmatic relation because you're saying they are in a position, they can fill in the same place in a sentence, and they are mutually exclusive. Now the question is, do we need paradigmatic relations in morphology? And there are certain cases which seem to indicate that yes, that you do need them, because you could ask yourself, well, why would we need this if we can express the same relation with just syntagmatic relations like this, same structure? So I am going to talk about a couple of situations which seem to indicate that paradigmatic relations are important. This is not very exhaustive, but it probably makes up the bulk of the most interesting cases. I don't know how well known these things are to you, but they might not be completely new. So in any case, the first thing is the idea of inflection classes. And inflection classes are a systematization of suppletive allomorphy. So I want you to take a look at these two examples in Irish and Old English and try to think what's going on here and why am I showing you these words. Okay, now, well, in the first example, in Irish, you have nominative singular and genitive plural, and what you can see is that nominative singular form doesn't have a marker with relation to the generative plural. The generative plural completely includes the nominative singular, and most importantly in this case, the generative plural is different for all three words, for focal, for muk, and or mutz, and so on. In the first case, the genitive plural, is marked by an il. In the second case, you see this diphthongization of the stem and an i, and in the third case is an ach. So they are completely different for these three words. In Old English, we have essentially the same sort of situation. You have two verbs, and they have different affixes for each of these three tenses. The first one is just consonant vowel, or consonant, or vowel consonant, and for the second one you have an additional vowel before each affix. This sort of situations where you have some kind of systematic allomorphy across different lexemes is what we call inflectional classes. And the definition of an inflectional class is the set of paradigms that exhibit the same inflectional patterns. Inflectional classes can be very, very large. They can have thousands of items, or they can be very tiny and just have one item. And inflectional classes with just one item is what we usually call an irregular lexeme. Here's an example of nominal inflection classes in Latin. These are the 5 main inflection classes in Latin. I don't know if you had Latin before in the school or not, doesn't matter. The point is, Latin has basically 2 numbers, singular and plural, and 6 cases: vocative, nominative, accusative, ablative, dative, and genitive. And you can see that the markers of these 5 classes, they are also called A, O, I, C, U, and A declensions, are different. There are some regularities across them, but the markers are quite different across them. So between the first and the second declension, right, you see that there are some similarities in the distribution of the markers. And for example, for all declensions, the accusative has an M at the end, the accusative singular. The ablative and dative plural have an S at the end, or the genitive plural has an at the end. But otherwise, there are contrastive differences, and most nouns in Latin can be assigned to one of these 5 classes. So I hope that the idea of inflection class is somewhat clear. The way that nouns or verbs or adjectives are assigned to the inflection class changes from language to language. However, one important point is that it's never arbitrary. You may hear that sometimes from some people, even linguists. That's incorrect. There are always motivations, even if hard to find, that tell you what the inflection class of an item must be. So here are a few examples from different languages. First one, Sleskian. You have a participle with E or Y, and a participle with the, and this is assigned based on the vowel. So Y after low vowels and R after high vowels. And you can see it here. We have a high vowel, and one takes R, high vowel takes R, low vowel and G, low vowel and C. In East Armenian we have a plural R, which follows monosyllabic bases, and Ner with polysyllabic bases. And this is exactly what you see. This is a monosyllabic base, and both take R, and 2 polysyllabic bases, and they take Ner. And this is another example from Standard Arabic, where the shape of the CV structure of the base determines whether you have a plural form with this shape or with this shape. And as an exercise, try to figure out which one's which. It's relatively straightforward. Sorry. All right. There's also semantic assignment besides phonological assignment. In German, for example, the inflection class of nouns like Affe, Hasse, or Junge, which is called endeclension, is based on semantics. Only animate nouns belong to this class. And there's locative il in Tamil, which is for non-human nouns, and itam, which is for human nouns. Welsh has a plural form with od for animal nouns, Lesbian has an oblique stem marker A that's only used for proper names, and another oblique stem Adi, which is only used with mass nouns. So all sorts of semantic assignment rules can be found. Sometimes these semantic assignment rules are not completely straightforward, but they are very often there. Transitivity can play a role in inflection class assignment. So this is Leschian, and you see two different inflection classes. The point is in the vowels here that go across the first, second, and third singular. And this pattern gives you intransitive, is used in intransitive verbs, and this is used in transitive verbs. Derivation can also play a very big role in inflection class assignment. Here are some examples from Welch, and take a look at it a second. Try to figure out what's going on and why is this an important issue. Okay, so it's quite straightforward. You get you have several derivative affixes, and according to the derivative affix, you take a different inflectional affix for the plural formation. There's also a very strong relation between inflection class and gender. Here are some examples of gender assignment in Zulu. I think this should be Zulu. And here you have a singular prefix, a plural prefix, and an example, and a noun that goes with these affixes. So here is woman or man, and you also have the agreement prefixes. Now, the point here is the inflection class of the noun are these prefixes. So awa, imi, I, ama, isi, isi. The gender agreement prefixes happen on the target. So these prefixes mark singular or plural on each noun, and whether a noun takes one of these prefixes is partly correlated with gender. Gender is marked with these prefixes on the targets, and the targets are verbs, and I think also adjectives. So take a look at these examples with inflection and try to think about them. It's important that you do these exercises that I'm telling you here, because this is going to be in the exam. Basically, I'm going to give you some examples, and you have to try to analyze them and understand them. And so I might give you this example and ask you what's going on here without any explanation, and that's the point. So take a look at the example and try to figure out what's going on in this situation. Okay, so should be quite clear. The inflection class of woman, you see it here. It's inflected for plural with awa, which is the plural prefix for this inflection class, and it has and the verb has the agreement of the gender of this inflection has the agreement of this gender of woman. Woman has a gender, and the gender is given by the agreement prefixes. Yes, so the woman called the boys, and there's agreement with both woman, which is the first agreement bit, and then there's the second agreement. Sorry, no second agreement. There's just agreement with the woman. The same situation here. You have a plural inflection class marker for Humvee traveler, and you have the agreement for that class. However, a very important point that is often missed even by linguists sometimes is that gender is not inflection class. In the previous example, it looks a lot like it, that the gender and inflection class are the same thing, but they're not. Gender is given by the agreement markers on the verb, and I think also adjectives and so on. Inflection class is given by the prefixes on the noun. So gender is not seen on the nouns themselves. This can be seen in Italian, and here you have several inflection classes for some nouns with the singular and plural suffixes, giardino, giardini, casa, case, mano, mani, poeta, poeti. The first and the fourth one are masculine, the second and the third one are feminine. However, so independently of the actual affixes that happen on the noun, you see consistent agreement affixes on the adjective. Here's the adjective, and the adjective is what shows you the gender, and you see a mismatch between actual affixes, but there is no mismatch in gender agreement. Poeta is masculine, and as such it shows masculine agreement. So again, very important, gender is not the same as inflection class. There's a couple of additional interesting features that can happen in inflection. The first one, syncretism. I don't know if you remember from last class, we saw more of, which has a very interesting inflection class system with very few markers and many inflection classes. Well, German does exactly the same thing, but it's a little bit crazier because German has essentially 8 cells in the paradigm, 4 cases, 2 numbers. However, most numbers only mark 1 cell in the paradigm differently. However, because you have all possible combinations across different lexemes, you can see all 8 cells. Here are a couple of examples. The first one, Lampe, it only contrasts plural and singular. So if you only knew Lampe in German, then you might think that German has no case, it only has number. But if you do look at other nouns like Tag, then you suddenly see the Tag marks differently two cells, namely the genitive singular and the dative plural. If you look at Zeuge, then you suddenly see that Zeuge marks differently the nominative singular from all other cells, and all other cells are the same. So when 2 cells in the paradigm have identical form, that's called a syncretism. Knopf has situation similar to Tage. Yes, it's similar to Tage. The marking is a little bit different. So the E in Tage is not in the dative plural of Knopf. Ärmel does the same thing as Tage, but without the E. Right? So it doesn't so Tage and Knöpfe contrast the singular and the plural. Ärmel doesn't. Ärmel is identical across the singular and the plural. And something like Beet is basically the same thing as Tage. These are just a couple of examples of inflection classes in German. You have all the possibilities. You can find nouns which mark every one of the cells differently from the others. So it is quite a dramatic example. It's relatively rare, and it's a case of a paradigm that's being reduced from marking case directly on the nouns to a paradigm that doesn't, but there are still some residues, and that's exactly what you see. You can see the reduction in nouns like Wald, which used to have an A in certain cases, and now it doesn't. Right. There's a situation called deponency. Deponency, it's relatively rare. It happens in Latin and Greek famously. This is Greek. Basically, most nouns inflect this way with an active form like with the suffixes o, is, I, ume, ete, and un, and a passive form which is ome, esse, ete, master, etc. However, some nouns use what some verbs use the canonically passive voice of other verbs, but with the active meaning. So the first singular of exome looks identical to the passive of pleno. However, it is not passive, it's active. And this sort of one block substituting a different block is what we call deponency. Then we have defectiveness. This is also relatively rare, and it's very difficult because the data are so messy. The most famous example is Russian, I think, where you have nouns like mishta, which is dream, which doesn't have a genitive plural. And it's funny in Russian because to count above 5 you need the genitive plural, so you cannot count certain nouns above 5 with a particular construction. You need to use a different construction. I think the other very famous example is kucherga, which is a fire poker, which also doesn't have a genitive plural. And there's a story of an office that they wanted to ask for 5 of I think it was kucherga, and they couldn't figure out how to ask for 5 of those, so they had to ask for 3 red and 2 blue. Yes, and then there's verbs like pobedit, which is win or defeat, and they don't have a first person singular in the present or future. So this sounds weird for most native speakers. And the final type of weird situation is called periphrasis. This should be very common to you if you speak an Indo-European language. And the point is that one cell in the paradigm of a verb is filled by a combination of an auxiliary and an inflected form of that verb. So the past perfect of go is have gone. There is no single word form for this form, and the same happens in German, the same happens in Spanish, etc. And now for something slightly different but still regarding inflection classes and inflection, I want to convey to you that segmentation can be very, very, very difficult. This is a situation with heteroclisis, which is a paradigmatic situation. Basically, you have one declension class in Czech, so mieszkam here, and you see the basic affixes and some overabundance. I don't know if I've already mentioned this. I can do that now, it's very important. So overabundance is when you have 2 different valid forms for a cell in a paradigm. So for mieszta, if you want to express it in the locative singular, you can either use it's miasto, no sh. Sorry for that. So you can either say mieste or miesto, and both are the same cell, and both have the same meaning. overabundance can happen for a variety of reasons. So there is dialectal overabundance. I think in German you can have something like Perke versus Parks, depending on whether you're Swiss or not. In Czech, it's not that. So there are nouns which have multiple forms for the same cell, and that's that. And anyone can use them. Spanish has the same for verbs, where you have two different subjunctive forms, two different past subjunctive forms, and they're perfectly valid and grammatical. Okay, so in any case, the important part here, you see the markers. For the singular of miasto and for the plural, and then you have more, which is C, or morze, which is C, and it has different markers in the singular and different markers in the plural, and then you have something like kurze, which is chicken, and the singular markers for chicken, ignoring for a second the blue ones, are those of morze, and the plural markers are, again ignoring the blue ones, those of miasto. Now, this situation where part of the paradigm of a word is identical to the part of the inflection class of a different one, and the other part of the paradigm is identical to a different inflection class. So the singular is identical to the inflection class of morze, and the plural is identical to the inflection class of miasto. That's heteroclisis. It's basically where an inflection class, that is the inflection class of chicken, is a mixture of both the inflection classes of morze and miasto. However, that's heteroclisis. That's another interesting situation with inflection classes. The important point here, however, is that segmentation can be very hard, and segmentation can be very hard because what's it and what's at? It's fully unclear. You don't need them because they are not in either of the mother inflection classes. For the singular, they don't happen across all the paradigm, and figuring out what the semantics of this should be is not straightforward. So I hope this sort of conveys inflection is hard. There are many situations in inflection which can be a little bit counterintuitive, which arise from mismatches between form and meaning, and there are many situations where paradigmatic relations become very interesting. We saw basically four such situations, and heteroclisis being probably one of the most complicated ones. In any case, that's it for today. I might upload a video I recorded for a previous class for the next one. So if you see that class being a little bit weird in the way I recorded, that's because it's from an older course, but I think it fits very well with the topics of the morphology introduction. Thank you.